President Donald Trump approved the use of federal funds to aid in IVF treatments. We're going to talk about that today. Hi, I'm Marcus Peter. So, some days ago, President Donald Trump issued a statement saying that effectively it's a new executive order, really, that he wants federal funding to be utilized to expand people's access to in vitro fertilization treatments, IVF for short.
The first is an executive order relating to the affordability and availability of in vitro fertilization and other fertility treatments. These are treatments that have become unaffordable for many Americans, or have been unaffordable for many Americans. And the executive order is a directive to the Domestic Policy Council to examine ways to make IVF and other fertility treatments more affordable for more Americans.
That was the primary purpose of this conference, to explain that they're all very important in their own way. Fertilization, I've been saying that we're going to do what we have to do, and I think the women and families, husbands, are very appreciative of it.
Now, it's not like he immediately signed it into being free across the country. Rather, what he wants to do in the executive order is to direct the Domestic Policy Council to start utilizing federal funds to figure out a way to curtail, or to at least to give recommendations to curtail or even mitigate the costs of cycles of IVF treatment. Now, just to give you a perspective, for range, at the lower level, they can cost about $12,000 one cycle. The higher level, about $25,000. So this is a costly system. And the problem is he's been promising this since his campaign. And even while he was campaigning as he promised this, I talked about this on my radio program, but numerous other commentators talked about this. This is raising tremendous ethical problems. IVF isn't what it claims to be. There's a real moral issue at play here. If we're seriously concerned about the increasing of fertility for those people who want to have children, and believe me, I understand the pain of this. I'm going to share a little bit of a story in a bit. But if we're seriously concerned about fertility, believe me when I tell you, IVF isn't a solution. It isn't a good solution, and therefore it certainly isn't the solution. When my bride and I first got married, we moved to California. I was working there, and so we moved to California. And we didn't have a lot of support by way of the faith. There weren't many people who shared our conservative ideals. And we had trouble conceiving for at least the first 2 years of our marriage. And so we sought out medical help. And I don't want to get into the weeds of what happened. I will say this, though. We were given practically no help except for recourse to IVF. And so being a good husband and also being a faithfully practicing Christian, I looked up all of the options that were made available to us, even outside of California. And let me tell you this, even if I wasn't Christian, IVF would certainly not be anywhere on the list of the decisions I would make pertaining to increasing fertility. What I discovered is at the lowest level, IVF has a failure rate of 60%, failure rate. And that's if everything else goes perfect. But if you couple other issues, your basic health concerns, your other mitigating factors, plus you can factor in other things, age and whatnot, and by the time you factor all of these things, the failure rate can rise to as high as 93%. I don't know what world tells us that therefore this is a viable option for the increasing of fertility. But even if we don't consider the tremendously high failure rate, which for most other treatments, we take a look at it and go, nope, we need to scrap this project and start looking at other options. There's a whole host, a slew of issues that it presents for mothers as well as children. And I'm going to go through a bit of a bullet point when it comes to this. Number one, ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. We don't talk about this enough, but when women undergo IVF treatments, they wind up getting injected with a tremendous amount of powerful hormone concoctions to force the body to do something it wouldn't otherwise do, trigger a release of a significant amount of eggs at once. All of these are then fertilized. So now you've got sin coming into the play here with the act of the father, unless it's sperm donors, which is still a sinful way of going about it. And so there's a moral, ethical concern. But let's talk about just the medical concern here. Women who undergo these treatments, if they wind up getting OHSS, ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. What winds up happening is they could get blood clots, deep vein thrombosis, kidney dysfunction, ovarian torsion, fluid buildup, so pleural effusions and ascites in the abdomen and the chest, complications during pregnancy, miscarriages, preterm birth. These are rather par for the course when it comes to IVF. Increased risk of cancer. Studies are coming up proving more and more that undergoing multiple cycles, or even one cycle, of IVF treatments can increase the rate of contracting anywhere from ovarian to breast to even cervical cancer. IVF almost always causes multiple pregnancies because many children are fertilized in the petri dish. They pick a few of the viable ones, tend to be 2 or 3. They implant these in the womb, and whichever one's implant, the doctor then goes through the process of what they call selective termination, which is a euphemism for nothing more than murder. The parents, with the doctor, choose which child to murder and which child to keep. And what this tends to cause, even on a psychological level, is emotional distress for the mom and emotional distress for the child who survives. I taught in school in California, and I can tell you right now, children conceived of IVF develop a whole slew of anxiety and psychological issues. One of which is that they grapple with the reality that they were a commodity for their children, for their parents, that their parents froze eggs and so kept them frozen somewhere until they were ready in their career to have children. And then they had a slew of children at once, anywhere from 2 to 3, multiple twins. And the problem with all of this is the child forever knows they were nothing more than an option that could have been aborted at any time. And that messes with your psyche because the destruction of embryos as a result of IVF is a standard operating procedure. And so you and I as Christians ought to look at this and go, there's something very wrong with this. As I keep telling people, fact check the fact checkers. If someone tells you IVF is a recourse for fertility, do the research. Find out the side effects to women. Find out the side effects to the family, to even the psychology of it. Find out what the Christian church teaches, what the scriptures teach about this. And then ask yourself, are there options? I want to point you to a particular resource called NaProTech, Natural Reproductive Technology. What it does is it works with the hormonal reality of the woman's body because given our nutrition and plus present-day issues of health, women tend to have hormonal imbalances that can cause massive problems. NaProTech seeks to correct the hormonal imbalances as naturally as possible so that they can cooperate with the woman's natural cycles, and it tends to have tremendously good fruit, higher statistical results of success than IVF.
I don't necessarily like to talk about it in terms of a Catholic option, which may make or give the impression that it's sort of a religious-based or not a scientific option or approach, which is not true at all. This approach of trying to restore fertility by trying to find the underlying problems and fix it is basically the same approach that we have in every other field of medicine. It is scientifically based. It has biologic foundations. And again, the basic approach, like in every other field of medicine, is to try to find the underlying problems and fix it, to work with and restore the woman's natural cycles, and to optimize the environment or the conditions to help the couple get pregnant together as a couple without bypassing the couple.
And so while this present presidential administration means well, and that there really is a well-meaning intent in this executive order, I fear it's not only going to backfire, it's going to cause a tremendous amount of children dying at the taxpayer's expense. This is going to incur at least, projectedly, $7 billion in taxpayer expense every single year. So these are things that we ought to consider, that moral issues tend to have societal ramifications. So let's think about this. Let's provide a true Christian charitable response. NaProTech is significantly cheaper, significantly healthier, and better for marriages, families, women, and children. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, I'm Marcus Peter.